be on dockets 405 and 406. I want to remind you that this public hearing is being recorded and broadcast on Comcast 8 and RCN 82. Ask folks in the audience to silence your cell phones and other devices. We'll have public testimony at the end of the hearing, so if you'd like to testify, please sign in and check off the box. Let us know your name and affiliation, and limit your comments to a few minutes. If you're watching from home, we also take written testimony by mail or email at ccc.wm@boston.gov. Again, just to read it into the record, today's hearing is on docket 0405, which is a message in order to reduce the appropriation for the reserve for the collective bargaining by $69,500 and to provide funding for the police department for FY20 costs contained within the collective bargaining agreement between the City of Boston and the Boston Police School Traffic Supervisors Association. And then docket 0406 is a message in order approving a supplemental appropriation of $69,500 to cover FY20 cost items contained with the collective bargaining agreement between the City of Boston and the Boston School Police Traffic Supervisors Association. The terms of the contract are September 1st, 2019 through August 31st, 2020. The major provisions of the contract include base wage increase of 2% and a new step effective the first period of September 2019. These matters were sponsored by the mayor and referred to the Committee on Ways and Means on February 24th, 2020. So in layman's terms, that means that a contract has been concluded and the aim is to move money from the reserve that we hold for collective bargaining into an appropriation for the relevant bargaining unit. So joining us today to walk through this and take questions is Justin Sterrett, the City of Boston's Budget Director. Justin, welcome. And I'd love if you could just start off by kind of giving us the context for this.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Councillor Bach and Councillor Flynn, for having me here today. As you mentioned, my name is Justin Sterrett, and I'm the Budget Director for the City of Boston. I'm here to offer testimony on the two dockets you mentioned, as well as answer any questions that you might have to the best of my ability. I am normally joined by Anne Marie Noonan from the city's Labor Department, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, but we will be happy to follow up with any labor questions that I am not able to answer. Dockets 0405, 0406 are appropriation orders that cover the FY20 costs of the collective bargaining agreement between the city and the Boston Police School Traffic Supervisors Association for $69,500. As you remember, the FY20 budget passed by the council included $7 million in aggregate to cover unresolved collective bargaining. So far in FY20, this is the fourth supplemental bargaining appropriation. The City Council has previously passed appropriations for BPS Planning and Engineering, BPS Bus Monitors, and PHC CENA. With the approval of this supplemental, the remaining balance in the FY20 collective bargaining reserve will be $5,651,789. And then with the completion of this contract, the city will have settled agreements with 95% of unions, city, BPS, and PHC combined. As you mentioned, the agreement before you today covers 1 year from September 2019 until August 2020, and is consistent with the pattern set by other agreements during that time period. And as you mentioned, there is a new step 8 effective September 2019 that is 2% higher than the pre-existing step 7. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thanks so much. So just to be clear, my understanding is that for most of the units, I think 19 out of 20 of the units that the city bargains with, that they're on a cycle that's going to start again in the coming fiscal year, and that many of those reached deals that ultimately covered the past 3 years plus this one, right, 4 years, but that this unit had only reached a 3-year, and that's why we're looking at such a short contract?
Yeah, absolutely. So so take a step back. So the vast majority of the city's contracts are up starting July 1st of this year, with the exceptions being school department, teachers, and the fire department, as well as EMS for PHC. The vast majority of the other city unions are out starting on July 1st. This contract was originally settled previously on a 3-year basis. which ultimately being a little bit short compared to most of the other agreements that we had on a 4-year basis. So that's why this contract is only for 1 year, so that when we do open up negotiations with both this union and the other unions on the city, we're negotiating on the same time period.
Got it. And can you talk about, is the 2% increase in wages across the board comparable to the other agreements reached in that time period?
Yep, I would say that the 2% as well as the new step were comparable to what other unions, especially city unions, got during that time period for FY20.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I noticed the estimated cost over the contract term in the materials you provided to us is $84,000, which for an ordinary unit would, I think, strike us as pretty low. Yeah. Can you just speak to why that is in this case?
Sure. Absolutely. So the employees contained in this union are only about 188, and they are mostly part-time. Actually, they're all part-time hourly employees. So the overall sort of size of the salary base that this is based on is relatively small. And again, it only reflects 1 year, and in fact, it only reflects, I think, 9 months of that year. So 9 months of a fiscal year. So the cost today is consistent with what was agreed to, and that's why it seems relatively short money.
And so this is the Boston Police School Traffic Supervisors. Is that, in layman's terms, what folks would understand to be sort of crossing guards?
Yeah, absolutely. So these are the crossing guards who work for the police department, but ultimately are stationed at schools across the city.
Mm-hmm. And I understand that there's also a side letter attached to the MOA. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, and this was one of the ones where I wish I had Anne Marie here, but basically in the process of finalizing this agreement, there was several different components of ratification that throughout the process required us to have a side letter and then a ratification by the union, and then ultimately a final agreement that covered both the side letter and the agreement. It was really more of a timing thing as opposed to anything overly complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my understanding is that it's just about clarifying terms mm-hmm. in the written document as they were understood by all parties in the spoken negotiations. Mm-hmm. I guess, can you speak to, I'm mindful that Anne Marie's not here, mm-hmm. But just sort of, I guess 2 questions. One is, as we go into this season of another round mm-hmm. of bargaining agreements, sort of how the city's thinking about that. Is there, to what extent will there be an effort to do those simultaneously versus mm-hmm. kind of in a staggered way? I mean, what should we expect as the council?
Sure. So I would say that we'll begin the process in earnest soon. The first time that you'll see sort of any financial considerations will be in the upcoming FY21 budget, where we will reserve a certain amount of money for the upcoming contracts. Now, I think there has not been a wage pattern set, and there's not been sort of a conversation had about what that's going to look like. I think that's really going to depend on when we start sitting down with the unions in the coming months and over the next year, really, to negotiate it. But I anticipate that the city's financial position remains strong, and I think we will go into those, open-minded to all proposals from the union and all certainly proposals from city departments who will be working with those unions.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned with this, we've got 95% of the units under contract. Can you just say who's still outstanding?
Yes. So the remaining contracts are bases, which are, I believe, vice principals in Boston Public Schools, and police cadets are the two major unions. The 2 major unions who are not under contract right now.
And what's the sort of term for each of those that's under consideration? Mm-hmm.
I can't speak to the terms that are under consideration.
Not the terms under consideration, sorry. I mean the term of time. Like, is this another, like this was a 1-year plug? Mm-hmm. Or is that what we're talking about in both cases?
I can't speak to what the terms are that they're actively negotiating on.
Okay, great. I think those are all my questions. I want to acknowledge that we've been joined by Council President Kim Janey, and love to turn it over to my colleague Ed Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Bork, and thank you, Justin, for your leadership on this important issue. Growing up in Boston, I've always had a great deal of respect for our school traffic supervisors, our crossing guards. They work extremely hard. to ensure the safety of our students. They're professional. They also play a big part in our school community. And they're often the first point of contact our students and their parents see walking to school. So they play a key role in the education of our students. They are hardworking, and I'm glad they're well represented by their union. And I know we value their work here in the council, and I know the mayor does as well. Justin, can you tell me how much? I know they're getting a 2% raise, and there's another step, but what is the average hourly rate that they make?
So it depends a little bit on their seniority, obviously, with the steps between there, but it's somewhere between $15 an hour up to $20 an hour.
Okay. And I know we talked a few minutes before, and if you don't have this information, maybe we can talk after, but are these employees entitled to health care?
So they are part-time employees. We'd have to follow up specific on the number of hours for each employee. I don't have that information with me, but we can certainly get you that information.
Yeah, I'm a big supporter of if you work even part-time, you should be able to get some health care provided by the city or provided by the state. Again, these crossing guards work hard and they're very professional. Oftentimes they're in the middle of the intersections, very dangerous, escorting our children to school. So I'd love to see if we're able to, sometime down the road, get them some benefits that they really earned. What type of outreach do we do to the traffic guards in terms of recruitment? How do we recruit traffic guards?
That's a great question. I would say we normally probably recruit on a cycle where if there's a sort of a set of positions that are open every year, the police department, I assume, would start that process probably early in the summer and recruit, not a class, but basically a set of crossing guards to come in for the incoming school year so that they can get trained up and understand the roads and intersections that they'll be assigned to.
And I noticed at various locations when I see a crossing guard, I love talking to the crossing guard, but I especially love to see when the crossing guard is speaking maybe Spanish to the students that are crossing the street, that are also speaking Spanish. It's great to see that recruitment of people that speak other languages as well. So that's an issue that's very important to me. Again, I do see that with a lot of the crossing guards, and I just want to acknowledge that, but it's important that we continue to reach out to our immigrant community. These are good jobs, and they pay a decent wage. I'd love to see them get health care and benefits and maybe even retirement. I think they deserve it. They earned it. But again, Justin, thank you for your leadership on this important issue, and thank you to my colleague, Councilor Bach.
Great, thank you, Councillor Flynn. Want to acknowledge that we've been joined by my Vice Chair, Councillor Anissa Sabi-George, and recognize the Council President, Kim Janey, for any
Thank you
questions.
so much. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. How are you?
Good, how are you, ma'am?
Good. I didn't hear your response earlier around the employees. How many employees are we talking about, and how many are full-time and how many are part-time?
Sure. So it is 188, and they are all part-time employees. They work varying hours depending on their shifts.
And how are they deployed?
So they are employees of the Boston Police Department, and they report to their local precinct, and then where they sort of report for the day, and then they are assigned out, usually on the same route, if I had to imagine, but we could certainly get you some more information from the police department about how, and the school department about how each one is chosen, but they start at the police stations and then report out to their sections, obviously usually by schools.
And how long will this contract go until, this proposed contract? Is it 2-year, 3-year?
So this is actually only a one-year deal. This catches them up with the majority of other city unions who are actually all out of contract starting on July 1st for the most part. So this would only run from September of 2019 until August of 2020.
And they make $15 to $20 an hour, you said?
Yep.
Okay. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Madam President. Now I would like to recognize Councillor Anissa Sabi George, my Vice Chair on Ways and Means, and an at-large councillor.
Thank you, Chair Bach, and I don't actually have questions at this point. I appreciate you being here, Justin, and look forward to reviewing the portion of the meeting I missed.
Thanks so much. So I think, yeah, we'll follow up with just a few on those points, just about how this resource is deployed. I think certainly I would be curious to know, how we identify places where we feel like we need particular extra safety precautions for students crossing. Because I think, as we think about a Vision Zero city, a place where we really need a crossing guard to get children safely across the street at school closing and opening might be a place that we need to be looking, at making a safer street in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to imagine that and I know there is a lot of coordination between the transportation department, police, and schools on the deployment of these, and we can certainly get you some metrics on how exactly that's decided.
Right, and I noticed that one of the provisions, the non-financial provision of the contract, has to do with using sort of seniority of the folks in these roles to allocate like where people get stationed. So it seems like that's also been a point of conversation in this
Sure,
contract.
I believe so, yeah.
Seeing no further questions, I think we're going to conclude this hearing. I just want to thank Justin again for coming. And I think we'll look forward to sharing this material with the whole council. I'm planning to report out positively on it next Wednesday. So thank you.
Council.